Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this week's Homeowners Be Aware podcast. If you've ever bought a house from a builder, were you happy with their landscaping package? A plant, a bush, and a patch of crummy grass? For many of us, when we are doing the designing and planning of our homes, what often gets lost in the process is the landscaping budget. It's something we often say, I'll get to that once we've lived there a while. Well, today we're going to talk about how you can finally take the plunge and work on having better landscaping around your home. It's also possible for you to finally have that garden you've been dreaming about. My guest today is an award-winning author and landscape architect and a leading expert in regenerating the health of our planet. Matthieu Mehuys is going to talk about how each and every garden we create can have a ripple effect on the environment and on inspiring people to have a positive impact on the planet. I'm George Siegel, and this is Homeowners Be Aware, the podcast that teaches you everything you need to know about being a homeowner. Matthieu, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, George. Yeah, thank you for having me on your show. I'm really honored to be on your show and to talk more about what you're doing.
It's my first time in Belgium, by the way. I've never spoken to anybody in Belgium. Now, you're, as the landscape expert that you are, one of the things that homeowners always seem to take for granted is landscaping. And what I'm talking about here in the United States, the builder will have what they call their landscaping package, which is usually a bush, a plant, and some really crappy grass, and they call it good. That's not good enough. And then so what happens is if somebody wants to hire an architect or an expert, they've run out of money at that point. So talk about how you do what you do and how important it is to really think about this.
Yeah, thank you for that question, George. I really love that. I think just to clarify a bit from my background, I'm a landscape architect. I come from a farming family and I have a deep understanding of how nature works. And to take it directly into your question, I think many people underestimate in first terms like the value of actually having a beautiful garden property, or like in some cases even an estate. And it's something like especially with like new constructions, people are in the whole stress about building. There's builders, contractors, there's so much things that they have to take care of. Maybe the building process is not going as planned. That's a common issue. The budget is going outside of what they expect it to be. It's very common. And then we come in and it's like, okay, we still have to do something about the garden. But we oftentimes really try to bring as much value as possible to our clients and look like, okay, what do you want to achieve? What budget do you still have? And what can we do today? Is there even a way that we can say, okay, let's do the most important things today? Focus on actually the most essential thing is to actually focus on the soil, actually, to improve and make sure that the whole environment is set well enough. And then along the way, oftentimes you can still improve your garden, improve your landscape. So it's a bit of and always like a question that we go through, like, what do you want to do? And sometimes we have clients and they're like, I don't want to wait. I want an immediate result. And they have a reasonable high budget. And they're just, I want to have it done immediately. And then there's other, especially younger people that say, no, let's just take it step by step. And actually then what I often do is like if people are on a budget, what's quite interesting is that I build together with them, I built the dream. I built the dream garden in a conceptual way. I make the plan together with them. We walk hand in hand and we think 10, 5, 10, sometimes 20 years ahead in time and think like, okay, what is the dream? Then we have a plan. And then from there, we say like, okay, what's the most important for you? And what is your budget? And we just start implementing things step by step.
Yeah, I think anybody that's ever listened to my podcast knows I have a real frustration with the construction industry and builders. And landscaping may be one of the biggest ones, because I think that at that point, maybe that's a profit center for them, or maybe they want nothing to do with it. So they do the absolute minimum. And I've never bought a house where I've relied on them, where I haven't had to completely redo what they did. And I keep getting burned every time, because For example, a pool, they'll put ground cover around it that you would not want anywhere near your pool, but they don't think about that. Or they plant bushes too close together, or they plant ones that are going to shed garbage all over your yard. So landscaping is something that I think is an art that's important. And you can tell when you walk around a neighborhood who has had a landscaper and who hasn't.
Yeah, exactly. You're completely right. Like, it's very obvious to see where the big mistakes are made, and that's often done, like you said, by people that are not specialists, and that for them they don't really value it. They just want, that's oftentimes with developers, they just want to sell the house and just put something. Oftentimes that's, interestingly, like you have this beautiful renders where they make everything look amazing with the beautiful garden, and then in reality nothing is actually realized. So it's a bit about what clients or people actually want.
Yes,
Like some
my
people don't
my three least favorite words: low bid wins, for a lot of those jobs.
Yeah, yeah, we face that oftentimes. Like, I put a lot of value in, like, we make all the documents that are needed to construct a garden, and then we can ask prices at different contractors. But I spent a fair amount of time in actually investigating if they can do the job. And like in our local environment here in Belgium, I have contact with good contractors, and I always try to look to work with them, even though they might be like that tiny bit more expensive. But I just know they're gonna get the job done, and that it's gonna be good. And it's something that you already brought up, but if you do something good at the start, it's actually going to save you money along the line. Because if you do a garden on a budget, if you don't focus on improving your soil, because oftentimes in a new construction the soil is completely destroyed, and we have to fix it by compost, mainly all organic things that you have to put in to restore the soil. If you don't do this focus, then, and you just plant things randomly, along the way plants are going to die, they're going to look ugly, they won't like develop well, you're going to have to redo it completely, and it's like a costly thing to do it again after.
Yeah, but I think people don't think about also. I know, for example, with the house that we ended up buying in Tampa, they built the house to accommodate a huge oak tree in front. So the house didn't extend forward as much. So that oak tree was pivotal in everything about the landscaping for this house. And they said, oh, we're going to take care of it. We're going to, put a barrier around it. That tree almost died because of how poorly they took care of it. I had to hire somebody to come in and save the tree.
Oh my
So
God.
people have to really think about the overall package and who's watching that stuff. Because I don't think builders really are worried about protecting trees. At least I haven't seen that.
No, that's so common. Like, oh, and maybe it's there's no, well, we might not blame them, because they also they have their planning, they will need to move ahead fast, and it's like, oh, it's a good tree, is nice, we can put some construction materials against it, or leave it's like in the shadow of it, and they don't really think that it's a living thing. And oftentimes I've seen it, like painters, they would go out, they finish their paint, they clear their brushes, and they just pour the paintbrush on the tree. It's like, damn, it's polluting. So yeah, but I want to add something interesting, is that I had experience working in Germany. I've done my master's in Germany, in Munich, and I worked in 2 offices for a couple of years there. And it's very bureaucratic to one extent, but the good part of this is that if they build a new construction and there is a tree that is valuable, they build like a whole construction around it. Like, they build it 1 meter wider than the perimeter of the tree. And then it's forbidden for anybody to enter that zone. And people are actually controlling that, like from the government. They will check if you're treating the trees well, if you're protecting them. So it does make sense. It's part of our natural heritage. We need to protect that, I think.
So how much, when you're looking at a landscaping project, do you prefer to start here in this country? What happens, some builders, you can't do it in Tampa, and a lot of cities are very protective of trees, which is a good thing. But some people clear the lot completely, so you're starting with a blank canvas. or you're coming in and you're working with what's there and trying to fit into the indigenous community.
So your question is what
Which
my
is which do
perspective?
you prefer as a landscape architect, as somebody who
Yeah,
does this? Is it what's a better path for you?
yeah, definitely. Like in each and every of my projects, my first step is to do a deep analysis. And I always say, even to my clients, I coach people to actually design their garden on their own. The first thing I say is you have to think like Sherlock Holmes. It's like you have to investigate what is ready, what is already available, what trees are growing, and like completely understand the landscape, the current situation, because it can actually be an asset of your property. Like I've discussed that with many people. What is actually the value of a old oak tree that's older than 300 years old? You can't put a number on it. It's like maybe it's a million, maybe it's more. It's so valuable because like you can even have your grandchildren that or your grandchildren that are still going to be under that tree. How amazing is that? So I think it's really important to analyze it, but then to another extent we also, if we like decide that some trees don't fit in or they are not of a high quality, or it's actually better to remove them and plant new, more valuable trees that are going to live way longer, then that also happens. So we don't have to be like we can still like interrupt the landscape wherever we want to actually create value as much as possible.
Now, something else that's really important to you is protecting the planet, and you care a great deal about that. So when you're doing landscaping, do you think about drought resistant things that use less resources, things that aren't going to shed things that are bad for the ground? I mean, what kind of thought process goes into incorporating climate into what you do?
Yeah, thank you for raising that question. That's a great question, and that's very dear to my personal heart because I know that we are facing some serious issues on a climatological basis. We can still discuss or question whether or not it's a human made thing. I don't even care about it actually, but we do have to face a climate that is changing. So I, again, in each and every project, we have to look what are plants that are definitely going to grow. How can we improve the plants and actually the soil? Because in this whole discussion, it all boils down to the soil. Soil is like the most important thing about our whole planet. The top soil, the top layer of our whole planet, it's like our skin. We have to protect it. If we like, obviously, when you build a new house, you disturb the soil, but once you've done that, it's like it has a huge impact, and we have to restore it. And there's many great ways of actually doing that. For example, using compost, other new innovative tools that can restore the health of the soil. And we're integrating that step by step. A lot of innovations, and many innovations are actually coming from sustainable or regenerative agriculture, that we're trying to take ideas from there and implement that on garden scales. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of. No, that's a pretty good answer. You know, the way that houses are built, the part of Tampa that I live in, they tear down old houses and then they put up new ones. And for example, where we live, you know, 6 months later, we were finding big pieces of porcelain and glass and different things. Just how they clean up after tearing down the first house and preparing it. I bet a lot of builders don't put much thought into how they're leaving it for the landscaper.
Yeah, I agree. That's oftentimes again they have a certain budget they need to build. It's the least of their concern, even though it's for the homeowners. It's super important to think about. Okay, once the construction is done, what are we actually going to do to make the landscape better
Now,
and more beautiful?
you put thought into making them as low maintenance as possible? I know how much do you have to
Yeah.
water it? How much will naturally occur there? And then in a lot of places in this country, we have the fear of fires, wildfires, and so a lot of times vegetation is put too close to a house, and that's part of the reason that a lot of houses burn down. So, how do you incorporate all those elements?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that in terms of being fire free for your construction is that you might actually build like a perimeter around your house where you focus more on ground covering plants or grass, so you can actually keep away the things that are flammable. But then again, I think if there's wildfires, it's probably very difficult to actually stop it from entering to your property. But if you have the space, you can actually plant more of the trees and shrubs a little bit farther away from the house, I think.
Well, having never been to Belgium, I don't know if you guys have palm trees there or not, but here people like to put palm trees right up against their house. And that's just putting a Roman candle right against your house. I mean, I think people don't think about that. What's the big issue you have? Do you have to worry about fires over where you are?
We're blessed to not be having issues with wildfires, at least not in Belgium. In big parts of Europe, it's becoming more and more an issue, like in countries like Portugal, Spain. So yeah, I've also had people experiencing that. And that's just the force of nature that we have to deal with. So yeah, I think wildfires is definitely something to consider, but in my honest opinion, I don't really know how we can stop fires from entering the properties. I think we have to
go ahead.
I think we have to think again on a global scale and actually find solutions to make sure that these fires don't happen. We have to plant more trees. We have to actually regenerate the planet in a way that the climate becomes less extreme, because the biggest issue that we're facing today is that there's so much extremes. Like sometimes you have super cold weather. I don't know. I think you had like frost in Texas, I think a few years ago, which
big ice storm,
probably never happened. And then you have, even now here in Europe, it's October, we still have 25, 30 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's not common. Like these things we did, like in my own life, I could experience the difference there. So
now you have on one of the questions that was in your bio is about reversing climate change in 7 years. Is that a dream? Is that something that realistically you think could be done? Because when you hear it talked about and people say, oh, we have to stop gas emitting vehicles, we have to stop doing all these different things, they never tell us how quickly things will actually improve if we do that.
Yeah, I like that comment. And I think we are in a sort of situation where the media is putting so much pressure on what the problem is that people also get paralyzed on where can we make a difference. And just to tie it back to your question about 7 years reversing climate change, it is definitely possible. There's ways that we can get back to pre-industrial revolution amounts of CO2 or equivalent of CO2 in the atmosphere within 7 years. And the greatest opportunity there is in agriculture, because the biggest land use on a global scale is agriculture, it's food production. And if we can change the way how farmers produce our food by focusing on healthy soils, having as much ground cover as possible, and this is all, I could elaborate more on that, but this is everything that has to do with regenerative farming. Even in America, there's a lot of things happening in that field, which is amazing. There's even a Hollywood film coming out about this very soon. I'm very excited about that. And if we can convince farmers to move ahead there, we can get, if only half of the farmers would practice that, we'd get back to pre-industrial revolution amounts of CO2 within 7 years. So the solutions are readily available. And then on top of that, I also think that each and every homeowner can get inspired to actually make their own property a high biodiverse property to also have an impact on our climate.
How would you do that? I mean, it's hard to get people to change anything. You know, I always try to talk to people about just making sure your house is safer, understanding the risks where you live, building the safest house possible. When you try to get them to then change how they're doing things in their yard and outside and how they can make a difference there. How do we do that?
Yeah, there's many ways that you can actually do that, and we can look at it at different levels. But a first, like, let's say, direct level is that if you can focus on just planting as much plants as possible in your property, you will actually harvest way more photosynthesis, and you will store much more energy that might then, if we don't store it in plants, it would otherwise turn into heat, and it's heating up the planet. So if you can maximize photosynthesis by using all kinds of different plants, basically creating the Garden of Eden on your own property, like everybody has an own idea of what a dream garden looks, but I think for many people it's clear that there's flowers, there's different trees, there's all kinds of things. But if you can build that into your garden, you're actually gonna have a positive impact on our climate. So that's a huge opportunity there. And then there's also other ways that if people can use their garden to actually grow a certain amount of their own food, then that is also having a huge impact, because that's putting less pressure on farmland to actually be super industrial. So if people can actually grow, even if it's just like a bush, a little bit of berries, they don't have to go to the supermarket. There's no transportation that is needed to get these berries to the supermarket. And you might think it's just a few berries, but if you think where it actually comes from, and everybody starts doing that, this will have a huge impact.
Anytime I've ever tried that, I end up all the bugs and things that are then attracted to the berries or the critters. We have a lot of rats in this area. We have a lot of squirrels. So Are you creating other problems? Because if I'm going to try to protect those berries by killing everything around it, am I not just creating another problem?
No, because it does require some time, but what you need to consider when you're actually regenerating a certain property by planting more and more things is that nature will need some time to rebalance. So it's very likely that you will be faced with some issues about insects and other things. But the only thing that people should not do is then go to all kinds of chemicals to kill the insects, and because this is like a quick fix. Because if you focus with your garden on actually creating as much biodiversity as possible, so like again I said, all kinds of different plants that will attract all kinds of different insects, and then when you have these insects, you will also attract birds that are going to eat the insects, and then you're going to actually create a whole ecosystem. And then obviously if we can do it on a larger scale together with your neighbors, or even on a neighborhood level, then that's going to create an equilibrium, or a level where things going to balance out again. Like I tell always people, if you have troubles with insects, you have to put up bird houses. Put your garden full of bird houses. You're going to attract birds. It's beautiful to look at if you see birds in your garden, and they're going to eat a lot of your insects. So it's just thinking about it in a different way.
Sure. I never have had good luck with that either, though. I when we lived in Texas, I put up a purple martin purple martin birdhouse. And those birds are beautiful, but sparrows would move in there and take over the birdhouse. So then we had to get rid of them. So nothing's ever as easy as an expert like you when you talk about it. For me, it's always a struggle because I don't have a lot of success with it.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And that's what many people are facing. That's definitely something valuable, but it's really about just keep trying things and keep improving it. And then eventually you reach a level where things start to level out. That's what we need to do on a global scale, I think.
Now, you said something else in your when I was reading about you, that you have a way to get rid of weeds, because those are a pain in the neck too. Not just the ones that come up through your grass. We get a lot of mushrooms that sprout up through rocks that we have. Through in the deck, you'll have weeds that come up between the tiles. How do you manage stuff like that?
Well, in the first idea, you actually have to take a step. If you go into like weeds in your materials in your garden, there's a few ways that if you just take a few steps back, you can actually use materials where you can have grass or weeds growing in between. Like in a lot of our projects, I try to make gardens as natural as possible, and you actually use, like, for example, big slabs of natural stones, and you have the grass growing in between, so you can just drive over it with your mower, and then you don't have to maintain your terrace because it's like completely interlinked with growing grass or plants around it. So then that issue is already resolved. So it's really about, that's why also it's so important to actually come up with a clear idea and vision of what you want to build from an early stage, and actually thinking about maintenance as well. Like in many of our projects, we think ahead, like, okay, we're going to design this, but then how is that actually going to be maintained? Is that doable for the owners? And all of that, doing that without any use of chemicals that are harmful for the environment.
All right, let's try to give people some takeaways here. If I'm buying a house or I'm moving into a house and I want to change the landscaping, what should be my mindset in terms of thinking what's the minimum to the maximum that I might have to spend on something like that? What would I want to think about so I approach that properly and then not bowled over by, you're kidding, it's going to cost that?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a really good question as well in terms of budgeting. And in terms of budgeting, it's also linked to timing. Like if you want to go low on your budget, do you have some time to actually do some of the things on your own? Because if you're low on a budget, you can actually learn a lot by getting people that know a lot about gardening, and that they help you to teach how you can actually design, redesign, and maintain your own garden. If you say, okay, I don't really have much time, I have a busy job, then it's just better to hire a professional, because you're going to be faced between like having your busy job and trying to maintain your garden. But you can also like, it's a kind of a spectrum between, I have a lot of time and I can spend full time in my garden. Maybe if you're retired or you won the lotto, you can do that. Or the other extreme is like you're a entrepreneur that has no free time, and then you get it done by other people. Or you can just be somewhere in the middle where you say like, I do have a busy job, or like a normal regular job, but I do have time in the weekends. I do have time in the evening to work in my garden. Then that can be very fulfilling as well. Like people can learn to do it on their own and feel the joy of actually building and maintaining their own garden. Because it's, in another extent, it's also proven that people that work in their garden are actually, they actually live way longer. Because if you are in touch, or if you can put your hands into the soil, it's proven that in the soil there's actually microorganisms that are also found in our gut and in our brain. So if you can be in contact with a healthy soil, your overall physical health is going to improve. So like I grew up on a farm, and my dad my dad is a farmer. So he's like, he sees these people going to the gym, and he's like, oh my God, that amount of work that they are doing in that gym, they could just come out to the farm and do the workout on our land. So you can also look at it that, like, you can use it as a physical exercise.
Sell gym memberships to your yard.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
That's I'm gonna have to patent that. Well, you know, I anytime, I don't want to sound like I'm doing a commercial for you, but anytime I've tried to cut corners on landscaping and not thinking about it and incorporating something that's really nice, I've ended up paying for it later. So I have a huge value for what you do, and I think people need to understand the importance. That's really something you don't want to throw away.
And in a way, gardening is like, I've been thinking about this with the whole revolution of AI that is changing our lives. There's more and more robots. There's gonna be so many people that can reduce the amount of work that they have to do. And then it's like, okay, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna spend our times with? And I think that gardening is actually gonna be one of the last things that we can actually still do a physical work and feel like connected to building something. So I think that's a great opportunity, that people are gonna have more time to spend in their own garden, or even a community garden, or doing something with their neighbors together. So yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it as well.
Let's start a campaign. Don't take the builder landscaping package.
I love that.
It's not going to work. All right. Hey, Matthieu, I'm going to put all your information in the show notes for people to get in touch with you and reach out. Anything specific you want to plug or talk about that you have coming out?
Well, I think I've mentioned it shortly, but I've actually come up with a masterclass where I teach people online. I have clients from all over the world on how they can actually build the garden of their dreams. The program is called the masterclass on how to create the garden of your dreams. And in 9 weeks, I take people on a journey that they learn how to design, how to understand nature, because this is the most essential part in maintaining your garden, is actually understanding how nature works. Because when you know how nature works, you're going to know how you can maintain it as well. So in these 9 weeks, it's so much fun to teach people that they can actually do it on their own.
Awesome. Well, I'll put the link in for that as well. And I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, George. This has been an honor to be on your show. I really love your content. So thank you for having me here.
If you have a story about your experiences as a homeowner, good or bad, I'd love to hear from you. My contact form is in the show notes. Fill it out, and you might end up as a guest on an upcoming podcast. And if you enjoyed what you were listening to today, I hope you'll become a regular subscriber so you don't miss an episode. A new show comes out every Tuesday. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.